All right, welcome everybody to the virtual brown bag of January 28th of 2021. As usual, we go through a quick introduction. We let everybody know that these meetings are recorded. We always encourage everybody to share things, and so whenever you're sharing, make sure that you don't share anything that's gonna cause you trouble, with clients, employers, or having to have us edit the videos later, which adds a lot of work that we don't have time for. So we like to just, at the end of the meeting, I just, re-upload, I download the video from Skype, re-upload it to YouTube, and then make it available to others who are going to be catching up later when they cannot make it to the meetings. What is the Virtual Brown Bag? It's a place where we get together, we share tips and tricks. Maybe it's tools that you've been using that makes you more productive. Maybe it's like shortcuts that you use all the time and you see people not using them. It's like, dude, there's a shortcut for that. Maybe articles or books that you've read and you feel like, this is an interesting concept, or this is really helpful. Share with others. Maybe, there are so many great books out there. And it's always surprising to me when somebody recommends a book, they're so excited about talking about the book, and I'm like, I've never heard of that book. And then I read it, it's like, man, it's been published 15 years ago. How come I've never heard of this book? And now it's become my go-to book, and it happens quite often. So I've been into this practice of always, whatever book I'm reading, if I feel like, okay, I'm excited about this book, I'll just say it, because, other people may benefit from that as well. Experiences, maybe you are trying to implement something or do something and, you've learned the hard way, share it. It's going to help you internalize what you've learned, and it's going to help somebody else along the way. So win-win situation. Frustrations or difficulties. Maybe you're just frustrated with, something you got done, and it's like, man, it shouldn't be that hard to do this one thing here, but this is the only thing or the only way I figured out. Well, put it out there. Maybe somebody else has gone through the same problems and frustrations, but they traveled a different road with a different, skill set and experiences, and then, you get better from there. It's never supposed to be a one-way conversation. It's not a typical user group type of presentation. It's more like, hey, this is something that I've been messing with. What do you guys think? Type of open discussion. We do this every Thursday from 12 to 1 Central Time here on Skype. And I have it, at least for now, this is just a platform we've chosen for the time being, because it's easy to just have one link that everybody can log into. No need to create a Skype account or anything like that. It does a recording. It's easy to republish, no time limit. So, free, win-win again. As we grow, hopefully, as we draw more people over time, we may need to migrate over to something more robust, maybe Teams or Zoom or what have you. This is a partial list of things that we've discussed in the past. We've done this for a number of years, in different incarnations, and we've been really all over the map. It can range from technical things, geeky programming language things, or it can be more high-level soft skills type of things. It's really anything that people are going through or experiencing and feel like, I need to share this. So just pick up, no constraints there. We have the virtualbrownbag.com website where folks can always find the link to the meeting here, information about when it happens, and at the bottom, links to the previous meetings with a little blurb about, what were the topics that we talked about, so folks can catch up with what we've been up to. Other than that, let's roll. So what have you guys been up to?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm new to the group, or I've been on Opcode for a while on Slack. Haven't really interacted a whole lot, but trying to get more into it. I don't have a big developer background at all, really. I do more scripting. I'm a network engineer.
Oh, interesting.
But I'm trying to get more into development stuff, and I don't know.
Okay, now is that out of a need or something that you just want to do or experiment? What's the idea?
Oh, both, all three. Yeah, I definitely am trying to do some more automation stuff with our equipment through Ansible and some of the Python libraries. and then just learning. And I mean, I'd like to kind of move more into software and out of hardware stuff. So.
Gotcha. Interesting.
So do you do a lot of cloud stuff?
So yeah, partially. So I work for kind of it's maybe a medium-sized company, but I run some VPN routers and firewalls in the cloud. But most of it is like branch locations, hardware stuff. But yeah, our VPN stuff is definitely virtual.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff is so not my world. It's very strange. I don't care how it all works. Just have it work and let me do the logic, and that's fine.
You know, it's funny when I always share this with people. When I first started messing with computers in the 1996, that's when I first started like, okay, oh, this is a computer. Great. MS-DOS. Oh, that looks geeky, but yeah, let's try it, right? And then from there, so I started like at the time learn about hardware and, you know, software and the network, and then got into like installing and configuring, you know, the old Novell network. What was it? No, what was the name? It was Novell Netware?
Netware,
yep. Right? Okay. So yeah, I remember like having to build a bunch of networks like that, and it's like, I'm doing this. I don't think I like this, man. This is kind of boring, right? And then, but you know, just learning everything there is to know about at the time, at least, about computers and all. Eventually came to a point where it's like, okay, my focus is going to be software development. That's what I really enjoy doing. So like nowadays, I cannot like build a computer from scratch to save my life, because it's been maybe 20 years since I've actually put together a PC where I bought all the parts and I put it all together. Now it's like, I don't even know how to do that, and I don't care, man. I just need a working computer so they can do the stuff that I actually do care about.
Yeah,
I will say it seemed really intimidating at the time. I remember that.
Yeah.
And because where I got into it, like, I mean, we were like, my dad would take me to those computer shows where they would have in like high school gymnasiums. Remember, they set up all those rows of tables, and you'd be like, "Oh, there are video games. Oh, a big bucket of video cards and stuff like that." And we'd go and like pick those out and kind of build some computers from that. And I remember it being really intimidating. But like, if I actually think about what you were doing, I mean, for the most part, it was like, okay, this switch goes here, motherboard, hard drive, maybe CPU if it was an integrated video card,
right,
peripheries. And then in case it wasn't actually all that hard. It's not like we were soldering anything.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward for sure.
Yeah.
Doing that.
So I think nowadays it'd still probably be mostly the same, just like way smaller and more
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and then on the network side, I mean, I remember back in the day, like setting up some like Windows NT networks once we've migrated over from Novell and all that. But then eventually I'm like, yeah, I'm not passionate about this. I'm gonna always get somebody else to do this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely it's definitely evolved into more cloud stuff. A lot of the SDN, like Ubiquity, has a major cloud offering, and all their devices tie into that. I mean, obviously Cisco and all the big players have cloud offerings, but
right.
Yeah. So, yeah, man, all those days. Though I will say, like, the cloud offerings, I think, definitely go beyond just network stuff and setting up your infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
Like I've definitely started to come around to the idea that no, it is a whole new type of thing, given how much just stuff in general is going on. Like a friend of mine also mentioned, said he thinks about is that like cloud providers have managed to bring scaling to the masses, which is an interesting way of thinking about it. But I mean, it's even more than that. Just to a large degree, when you look at like the huge panoply of like services that like AWS comes out with and how they all integrate together, it's like, yes, you have to live on their infrastructure and their hardware, but especially the services that are a little more abstract and not like very specific implementations of stuff. Like that is to a large degree what some of the initial discussions with microservice, well, not microservices so much, but service-oriented architecture were about. Like that's kind of what we were the end goal that we were pushing for. If you go back in history, even more like that's what a lot of people who were envisioning the internet network were kind of thinking of, like having these clouds of very specific services. So it does seem like it gets at something that's deeper than just like, oh, I can run my same stuff in someone else's computer.
Yeah, I came from a technician side long time ago when I was in the Coast Guard. That was my service, and I was an electronics technician. So I did a lot of board level stuff, and it was all very hardware. And then just kind of over the years started working more with the software side of it and seeing that like there's just a lot of stuff that can play into, you don't just plug stuff in. There's so much more involved. So.
What stuff in the software side have you looking at? Like, are you working at it kind of from a lower level point of view where you're like looking at how device drivers work, or is it just in terms of automation?
So, yeah, it's more for like deployment and monitoring and management, configuration management. We have a payment systems environment, so we work with PCI and doing like pin testing and just stuff like that, and how it all ties into the network. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, so definitely useful there. And that's interesting. That's one of those things like people have been prognosticating for a long time, that the sphere of what people who aren't programmers but still have to write code is just going to keep expanding. And that's kind of the vanguard of that whole thing, right? Because you ops people, definitely not coders, data science people definitely still have to write code. And I mean, there's no reason to say it won't keep going, especially as people get more literacy. You get like managers that have to do it and stuff like that because they want to do their own data analysis now that there is all this data available, which is pretty new at that level, kind of. So yeah.
So
of course, no. Yeah.
For like data analysts and networking folks, is Python the language to go?
That's been my general impression of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's been mine too.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of the libraries like NetWeako, and I think there's a new one, Normir. A lot of those are definitely Python. So.
Yeah. NumPy, whatever. Those are big ones. Was it the one with the P? Pandas for data analysis. Like seems to be a must. Enough that like I feel like even though I don't do data analyst work, like I feel like I should know the basics of it. Like I've certainly run into it before, just from the very, very little bit I've done. I know, like, what are some other ones that have been going? Like, I there's definitely still an R community that is pretty powerful, especially on the data analyst side. And then I don't know. I do know that there's a decent amount of automation that happens in Go, which I suspect is largely because Docker's written in Go, and there's like better integration, so there's good integration there at that level. And I'm sure you'll start seeing Rust because you'll start seeing Rust leak into everything because you could do like low level stuff with that. But yeah.
Interesting. I did not know that Docker is written in Go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a decent amount of the cloud services are. I mean, like, Google.
Right.
Google does a lot of stuff in Go. And
yeah. Right.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. Cool. What about you, Claudia? What's your week been?
What have you been
thinking about?
It's been going. So next week, I'm actually bringing back my Improving Code user group. I had, on hiatus for a little while because I was just so busy with a bunch of stuff. But I wanted to keep that going, so I scheduled the next talk for next week, next Wednesday. Just throw a talk on cleaning test code or refactoring test code because it's something that keeps coming up where folks write tests to end up with better production code, but then the test code itself does not look that great. Right? So of applying the whole red-green refactor to every code written, including tests, usually people just stop at the refactoring the production code. And so I'm going to just throw together a talk on that, like what patterns I tend to see a lot on all tests, like regardless as to whether it's a unit test, integration test, end-to-end test, Cypress, C#, JavaScript, TypeScript. There are certain patterns that always show up. So just throw together a talk like that because I see myself like cleaning up code like that a lot. So throw together a talk just to cover some of those patterns.
Okay.
Yeah. Something. What else? Yeah. I'm still working on doing some writing a bunch of end-to-end tests in Cypress, and also like trying to identify better ways to like just clean up some of those tests. Because again, pretty much every single thing that I find online about, okay, these are some Cypress tests, it's always very much, okay, this is how you use the Cypress commands to automate the browser and do stuff, but nobody talks about, okay, how can we make it easier for people to read the test to understand what it's doing? So putting some focus on that, trying to, always get it closer to have like a standard way or approach. Again, regardless as to what type of test it is, I want to see like the same kind of English that comes out of it. It's like, okay, I'm reading, okay, got it. Okay, it's not in the end-to-end test because it's something like closer to how we're validating things on the back end side of things. So as I alternate between tests for the different parts of the app, I still want to see the same kind of English language to understand what it is that I'm looking and then diving into the actual implementation. So it's been interesting because I'm definitely not a Cypress guy, so just trying to understand how certain things are done there and ways to make it a little bit better.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been let's see. Actually, so about Cyprus specifically, so you're spending like a decent amount of time in Cyprus right now, right?
Yes.
How are you finding like it really compares to like because you wrote Selenium tests back in the day, right?
Very.
Or like browser animation stuff.
Yeah, not
No.
when I was doing more with browser automation, it was with Ruby on Rails. So I was using Cucumber, right? So that was like my previous experience with browser automation. Didn't do much with Selenium.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Like, what do you feel are the new things that Cypress brings to the table?
I'm not gonna.
What feels much better? What feels different about it? I guess.
I am enjoying how it handles things. Like I remember back in doing some automation like that when like JavaScript things came up where the tests would fail because certain elements are not still yet available. So it's like, well, it's not available because it's a JavaScript call. You have to wait until, so Cypress handles that kind of stuff. So it knows to wait because that element may be there. And if it doesn't show up and then you can configure the timeout and all that, then it fails. So it handles that nicely. I'm liking how it allows me to easily stub network calls and verify network calls because that's something that I'm specifically focusing on where even though we're calling it end-to-end tests, I am not writing these tests to go all the way down to the database and back, right? I'm seeing it as end-to-end from the user's perspective, like the end-to-end of the activities that you're trying to perform. because previously when I worked in projects where we had like end-to-end that goes all the way to the database, the test would take forever to run because the application interacted with many different services and databases, and those calls took a lot of time, when all we were trying to really verify is, okay, from the user's perspective, when the user navigates to this screen, goes through this workflow, then the user sees the following information, right? So the user interaction with the system. And then now we cannot run the test because it's going to some server that's down at the moment, and it's some server that's outside of our the third-party API. And it's like, well, now my tests are failing because of that thing there. Kind of sucks. So I'm making sure to, with the team, what we are doing is we design the contracts between front end and back end. So it's like, okay, the front end is collecting the following data from the user. And when the user provides this following trigger, like it's a click on a button, for example, it's supposed to make a call to this API. So we specify, okay, this is the URL, right, the endpoint, and this is the payload, right? So, and then given this payload, then on the backend side of things, we have the tests that confirm, look, as long as we receive a payload with the following data, the backend knows what to do, and it will respond with the following response. So then I can stub that from the front-end standpoint. So right now, all these Cypress tests, they don't touch the database at all. So I'm stubbing all the calls into the APIs, right? And whenever I do get something back, I say, okay, if you get something like this back from the API, then the front end should behave the following way. It should display certain things on the UI. It should move the user someplace else, whatever that is. So that's been working out pretty well because they make it pretty easy to do that kind of work. So the verifying response from API calls and stubbing outgoing network calls.
So you're not stubbing the database, you're just stubbing like kind of the network stack, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the XHR call that goes out, like, okay, I'm expecting a call to this API. When that happens, here, return this JSON, right? Don't bother trying to touch the backend, right? Because for the backend, yeah, we have unit tests, we have integration tests on the backend specifically. So, like for instance, the integration tests are like, okay, we know that the front end is going to call this endpoint here, passing a payload like this. So when that happens, it has to do whatever it does there, touch the database and all, and produce the following results. So instead of having an integration test, which is common, a lot of people do, where they instantiate the controller itself and make a call into the action, we actually take a step back and say, no, the front end is not going to instantiate the controller. The front end will send a call, right, an HTTP call to the endpoint. So our integration tests make a call to the endpoint because that way we also exercise the middleware and all that stuff that happens in between the call and the action in the controller, right? So verify that the front end makes the proper calls. We verify that the back end, even the call, knows what to do. And then, of course, unit tests to verify, more granular business rules and things like that. So that's been working out pretty well, like having this well-rounded up. And the reason why I've been dedicated to this is that we haven't had like a dedicated QA person working on the project. So I've been like doing this work where I'm writing the end-to-end test, making sure that the application all works, and then specifying this patterns of communication between the groups. So having that pyramid, right, where at the top, the very top, we have a few end-to-end tests that verify the integration user system and the response back there from the user's perspective, and then the unit tests and sometimes integration tests for the things that happen behind the UI, like the Angular tests, for example, for the components, making sure that the components do what they're supposed to, that they make calls wherever we need them to make the calls, and then have an integration and unit tests on the backend side of things. So That's working out pretty well, man.
Okay. Cool. The That's interesting. So like I've actually was like trying to think while when you were talking about it, it's like, why haven't we like been doing platforms with a lot of that kind of just stub out the API before, and then I'm just realizing like, oh yeah, like the whole thing with like splitting up applications, web applications, so there's anything worth testing in the UI versus the server, and there's a real API backend. I mean, like that's like 12 years old, less if you're like been doing a lot of MVC, ASP.NET MVC or Rails, right? Because in the past, like in those projects, in those frameworks, typically you're getting stuff posted all the way back to the back end, and then on the back end you're just generating HTML. So what the heck are you going to stub exactly unless you're like very careful in doing an API style pattern just in the back end, which nobody was.
Yeah, that's exactly
However,
what.
that is an interesting thing because I've been I have a little short term contract right now. I've been putting together an Electron application, and like I want them to be able to use it on the web, and I want to have like nice UI components because I'm not a designer. I don't have a designer available, so Material UI, React components, pull those in, and that means I'm using React, and there's a nice boilerplate for React available for Electron. Great, I like React. But I also want to make it easier for them to move it to the web later if they wanted to. And then I
Have I lost everybody, or we've lost George?
George.
Yeah, can
Yeah,
you
it's
not
just
hear
George.
me?
Okay, now you're back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, my internet. So there are certain patterns that are that from the web that I totally want to bring over, even though they're not strictly necessary, but they still seem like a good idea. Like, you know, now that I do have all this background in the web, and also I'm using a library like React, which makes it like pretty straightforward to do, and I have all the patterns already in my mind, like still doing an API layer, even though it is all on the server, and still doing well, not on the server, but it's in one process, and still doing all those same things. But now you just get to like do extra stuff. Like I can have a client side route that's only like a show file open dialog or something like that, which you can't really do on the back end. But yeah, it's interesting. It's like an interesting thing I've been observing a lot, where it's like, all right, like maybe like some of these web patterns absolutely can and should be backported to non-web environments because they're just good ideas that the patterns and the tools that had available at the time, we didn't settle on these, but there are still very, very good patterns, like having a single gateway for all your requests to data logic to go through, right?
Yeah, that is so extremely important. One of my previous projects, that was a huge point of annoyance to the team, because the front end was making calls to like, say, 6 different endpoints from different providers, right? Which we didn't have any control whatsoever. So many times developers would be stuck working on testing some feature because one or more of these external services were down. And then it's like, well, that's extremely, not productive. That's when we started like moving. It's like, okay, the front end has to talk to one API source. That's it. And then let that guy handle the orchestration with the other services, because that way it makes it so much easier to run, testing, to create some, like even if like you have a real dedicated QA person who's clicking through things on the app, you can always just create some fake services. And this is something we are doing on my current project, where while some things are being developed, we're not bothering about doing the backend stuff yet. We have a service on the client side in Angular that's essentially, look, when the UI is calling this thing here, use this mock version, just populate with whatever data, and then there's just a switch that we say, okay, now that we've tested the whole thing local, we see it working, yeah, just flip a switch and it's going to hit the backend API, and then now the backend API could also be set to say, well, yeah, if this is just a testing scenario, I don't want to go out to third-party services. I'm going to just mock a response, just stub out the response. Otherwise, it makes it so much easier. It's faster to develop. It's faster to test, right? And it's more composable, if you will. That's been helping out quite a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that's I like I haven't leveraged still enough of it in Cypress is just how you can create commands or override their commands. So everything is queued off of a cy dot something, right? Cy dot visit, and then you give it a URL and it's going to visit there. So they make it pretty easy to like override that behavior or just create your own so that you could say something like cy dot login, which is your command to just log into the app without having to go through those steps, meaning you just make that API call that performs the authentication, and then you put that into the store or whatever you need to put some tokens back. So I've been enjoying that. I've used like that 2 or 3 times so far to clean up some code, and it has made quite a bit of a difference. Mostly cleaning up code where, say, in my test, it's described as given I am a seller, or given I'm a user with the following permission. So stuff like that, I have a context class that I bring into those tests that knows what does it mean to be a seller. It knows like what kind of tokens the endpoint would return, so I can fake those out and say, hey, here, this is what you should just stuff into the local store, and then everything else from the front end's perspective is going to just work, and I don't need to do anything special about it. So things like that have been cool.
Yeah, that's definitely useful stuff. Yeah, I mean, like the testing world has definitely. I've enjoyed how it's been evolving. It's good stuff. Though again, we're kind of getting back to the point where, all right, where people need it's like a cycle, right? People need like to be to we need to go back and be like, no, okay, we've been drifting a lot. There's still this TDD thing that we need to reinforce with everyone, and how we do it and why we do it. I guess it's not really so much a cycle as just a constant need.
It is very I keep going back to that because it's part of my daily basis, and there's always like, oh no, but now I'm doing BDD, I don't do TDD anymore. It's like, huh? Because people don't quite see the boundaries and what those things are, or even when talking about BDD, at times people say, oh yeah, no, I cannot do BDD, we cannot afford that in this project because we cannot set the tools in our DevOps pipeline. I'm like, no. Wait a minute, right? You're thinking tools like SpecFlow, Cucumber, yeah, I get that. But you can implement like a BDD or start a BDD process without ever talking about tools. Just talk about the language, right? How you're communicating with discovering what is the business case for a certain story, what are the scenarios, make sure that you know how to communicate that message. And that you can write on on the back of a napkin. You don't need tools for that, right? Because it doesn't matter how badass your DevOps pipeline is and the tools that you have. If people cannot communicate in English the thing that they're about to build, no tool's gonna save anybody. And then once you have that, that's what I've been telling people. Once you've nailed that part of the communication, then yeah, now we're getting back closer to the computer side of things. Now you're going to TDD mode, right? Now you know what you're supposed to build, the whys, And then now describe your, like the APIs that you would like to have to implement the behavior that you just discussed. Right? But I agree, George. It's like you have to keep going around, because most people get to TDD like from writing unit tests. Like, oh, I started writing tests. I know now how to write unit tests. When I'm really writing integration tests, right? That's usually how we start. We start like writing these tests that are doing a whole bunch of stuff, and they are really integration tests. And then we learn how to, refactor them into actual unit tests. And then from there, we hear about, oh yeah, some people say that we should be writing the test before we write the code. Okay, how does that work? Right? And then they get into the practice. All right, I'm going to create a calculator class. Okay, let me write a calculator tests and start writing the tests. And then after a while, we get into like context-based testing. You get into BDD. You start thinking from the outside in. But those, man, George, I would love to hear your point or your experience by this time. But I can tell you that for me, it took years to get to this kind of understanding.
It took me, I think what happened was in around 2007. So like around 2007, I got a job where I was the only developer. I've told this story before, but I could see how the guy before me had screwed this up, and it was like a large company. I was just the only developer. And I wanted to avoid that, so I was doing a lot of reading about stuff. I found like Code Better and all those blogs. Right. And that's why, so I started like learning about unit testing and TDD kind of at the same time, because that's what they were talking about as ways of doing stuff better. It took me, I would say, a year of like dedicated practice and doing it wrong until I felt like I was efficient enough with it that in at least some situations it was taking less time than the alternative would have. And to be honest, I backslid on that a little bit. Like there are definitely there's lots of times now where I'm like, I'm not gonna put together tests because it'll take me more time to do that than not. And I think actually part of the reason for that is a lot of the testing frameworks, like we had like a state of testing for frameworks in the early 2010s that were like dirt simple. And now they're starting to get more complex. And, especially when it's not one that I know like the back of my hand. It's not that it's too much effort for me to write a test or to formulate the thought or something like that. It's too much effort for me to understand the framework and then figure out how my thoughts map to that framework, and then do all that within the scope of the feature or project that I'm trying to do it at. And at that point, like it's just not worth it. And like that's one of the things, and also some of the frameworks which are trying to be a little more opinion, like they don't do stuff in the same way that I think about it, right? Mm-hmm. But like I think being able to do nested tests is like really just the most natural thing. Actually, it bothers me a little bit that in .NET I can't do it, but I know a way, kind of how to make my way around with it in .NET if I use like XUnit or something like that. Though using NUnit is still very difficult. But like when I was doing stuff in Python, like in order to manage to get the testing framework to work the way that I thought about that stuff, and I could do it quickly, I had to basically write my own testing framework that sat on top of PyTest, because like it just didn't work the way that I thought about stuff. And I'm finding even like JavaScript, which probably initially like stuff like Mocha and Jasmine matched most closely to how I thought about stuff, and just allows me to get it done more. Like now some like Jest is becoming more popular, and it's got so much stuff in it, so many different ways they can go wrong.
Uh-oh. George froze. Looks funny.
Longer figuring out the framework, figuring out how to get it working the way that I want.
George, hold on.
You break up again?
For like 10
yeah.
We lost you for 10 seconds.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is like now I'm seeing that even in JavaScript where like you have something like jest, which is like here's the kitchen sink, here's a bunch of stuff, and it's got like very specific patterns. It's like great, but those aren't patterns that I work the way I think. Those aren't tools that work the way I think. And now again, I'm at a position where if I'm starting a project or if it's a short-term project, it's just not worth my while. Like I was in that situation 2 days ago where I was like writing a database migration system because again, it's an Electron app. We just decided like, okay, you know what? For simplest thing for to store the stuff is treated as a the file system as a document database. You just store JSON documents. And you still need a migration system for that. So I was like hammering one together, and I can kind of do it from memory. But there are certainly situations like I would like to TDD this, and I started up and like boot up the test runner, and it was just like, man, no, this is gonna take me too long to do. I'm gonna write out in English how I want it to work, like do the test spec, put it in a big comment block, and then be like, no, I'm not gonna implement this test because it's too much damn effort. We've made the tools too complex in order to make things, I guess, make it easier for beginners to get started, but I kind of almost wonder if we're making it harder for them to think deeper.
Yeah. And I feel like that whenever, say, I'm working on a new tech stack, like when I first got into React, for example, that was the case, and I always bring this up to folks, like, I don't care if I don't know how to write tests for React or I don't know how to implement things in React. I still want to be able to describe the specs in English, because just by having that conversation with the team and with the PO, it unveils so much that, yeah, at times I ended up with like, okay, I have the specs. I have no idea how to write this test here. I don't have that skill yet. But just the fact that we took the time to have that conversation and flush out those sentences, it's like, to me, it's already, a win type of situation.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, sorry. I broke up again, but it's fine.
You mentioned Electron. There's actually something else that came up to me this week that has been driving me nuts. So anybody who's been chatting with me at any point in the last 12 years know that I'm a very big Evernote fan, right? I've been using it. I use it like crazy. After Chrome is the first app that I'm installing in any new box. So in 2009, when I first started using the very first Windows version or PC version of Evernote was written in WPF, because that was if you're creating a standalone desktop app on Windows, that was the technology at the time. So they came out with that first version, people were using it, all great and all, but there were performance issues because WPF didn't render itself well for that kind of application. So they had to take a step back and rewrite Evernote from scratch, I think in C++ maybe. And I believe that's the version that they had until like 2 or 3 months ago or so. It just came out with a version that, oh my goodness, I regret so badly that I've installed this new version. Like in 12 years, I'm like, I cannot believe that you guys did that. So my understanding what they did is, because they have been keeping the standalone apps, like for the Mac, the PC, the web version, iPhone, Android. So they have separate code bases to support all of those scenarios. And as far as I can tell, they've been doing pretty well from the user's perspective, because I do use PC, Mac, web version, and iOS. The only one that I don't use is Android. So I'm used to how the feature parity that they have works across the platforms. It seems like it's really got pretty expensive for them to keep all those separate code bases. So they once again rewrote the whole app in Electron. It is dog slow. It does not have a whole bunch of features that I use as part of my system that I use on a daily basis. Like I rely on how I organize certain things and I have them quickly accessible. Those features are gone. And what drives me nuts is that they don't have like a clear roadmap, like, oh yeah, it's a whole new platform. We are, putting it all back. Here are the features that are missing, and this is our plan. Like expect feature X in 6 months from now, or don't ever expect that back. It's like, I do not know. So at the moment, I'm like looking at alternatives to see if there are any other tools out there that I could switch over to. I've been watching a bunch of videos of people using Notion is the other one that a lot of people are using. It seems interesting, but it's still like, yeah, there are certain things that I have as part of my process that those are not gonna be. So, anyways, that's my rant for the week. That's been driving me nuts the last week or so.
I very much love Rome.
Rome.
The Rome. So Rome. Rome Research is the like paid product. It's a product company, which I haven't actually used because there's like open source takes on the same concept. But the basic idea is that you have your notes should be super dirt simple to create, same type of thing like Google Keep. You just start typing.
Okay. Oh, just froze. George, come back to the world of the living.
Whenever you're in a note, what was that?
Oh man, now you're back. You broke up for like 15 seconds or so.
Yeah. So the big thing that Rome adds to note taking, other than just like it's easy to create a note, is it's super easy to link notes, and you get to see what notes backlink to the note you're working on.
Okay.
And so you it's kind of like your own personal web that you're building together. But by having all those links always visible, and I mean, I think we need to do some work on having it be something you could like query more deeply, like show me everything that links to things that link to this and stuff like that. I don't know if Rome Research does it. The Emacs version that I use doesn't yet. But like, I think it makes it so easy to synthesize thoughts by sticking together these concepts that you kind of knew connected, but had kind of forgotten about how the connection. It's super nice. So for that sort of stuff, it's really cool. There's a free, obviously, version in the Emacs called Org Rome that I use pretty heavily, and I have been for about a year now. It's really nice. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh well. You're not a believer, man.
So I don't use Rome Research. I don't use this particular product, but it's the same concept. They popularized the concept, but this is the product. There are also open versions on this concept as well. Because I mean, like they can't patent linking, right?
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean I would certainly recommend you test it out and see how it feels.
Okay.
I know people that swear up and down by this thing.
Yeah, that I would definitely look into it. It's interesting because like some of the videos that I've watched of people using Notion, they describe it. It's a great tool to organize things, but not as much for note taking. They say, oh, this they keep the one thing that they all say. Oh, it's a database. This is a database. It's a way for you to create databases and think of it as like an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm like, oh, now you're losing me, right? And a lot of them, that's the approach that they take. You're creating this database, and then you can create, and then showing like this. It's really like a glorified Excel, and then some actually take the time. So apparently, it's pretty cool how you can customize some of these like databases to have an entirely different view. So like having a calendar view, for example, I thought that was interesting. It's like, oh, okay, you may have entries there that if they have dates, you can say, okay, show me the calendar view, right? I said, okay, that's kind of cool. But then when you click on the thing, you cannot have like a rich note like this, what we're seeing in the Rome research here, where you have like all the linked notes, because that's something I use a lot. right? It's like a top level note that is structured in a way to have links to other places that I want to go. And the tagging system that I use, apparently in Notion, they do have a good tagging system. Evernote too, but what was, let me,
So I'll tell you what, that thing you said with the dates pulling up to a single view, there's a thing that's been doing that for 17 years, and that's Org Agenda. That was like one of the main
yeah,
original use cases of org mode in Emacs,
right.
and that's where Rome is taking that from. Like,
Okay.
because the idea, and I don't actually even use that feature much personally, but
Okay.
I mean, I know some people have like their lives organized in it. It's very impressive.
Interesting.
Um, yeah. But
Oh,
like, yeah, that whole idea, like you drop dates, you could drop to dos and stuff like that, and then you have views, have something that can index all your files and puts together views on all that.
gotcha.
Uh,
Yeah, I know it's a
it's
note
a
similar to that.
yeah. It feels like a new idea, but like no, it's very well tested. Um,
Right.
what I really love that Emacs brings to it also is because it's like all org mode and stuff like that. I can use also all the org features inside of the notes, which is like stuff like having running code inside of it. So I can have like a notepad about like doing stuff with EC2, and then directly in there having code that runs, and I just like hit a hotkey on that and it executes it. So it's like Jupyter notebooks laid on top of that.
Gotcha. Oh, froze again. Right. Yeah, now you're back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get that. Like one of the features that I've lost that I use as part of my system, right? So in Evernote, the previous version, I was able to create tabs and then filter each tab on notes that are tagged to something. So like notes that I know I'm gonna need today, or notes I'm gonna need this week, or notes I'm gonna need this month. I just tag them in that way. I have tabs open, so it's very easy for me to alternate between those. That's gone. They don't allow you to create at least like to launch a new Evernote window. So instead of having tabs, I would have different windows. That's not an option right now. Part of my process is every month, as part of my monthly review, I go through my notebook structure and my tag structure to make sure that the tags that I was using still are meaningful, right? Because I don't want to create that like tag explosion where I have tags that have only one note in there. It's like I want to combine that. So they used to have the tags window take up the full panel. So every month I would go to that full panel. I could see a lot of tags, and then I could like, control shift select and go selecting all the tags, and then dragging them around and restacking or nesting them. That's gone. Now they have like one column that shows all the tags, and you cannot like select multiple tags to move them around. I'm like, guys, you're killing me here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
right now what I'm thinking is I'll probably just flip back to the previous version on my Mac, which is the one that I use most of the time, and keep an eye on the most recent version of Evernote on my Windows just to see how it's evolving. But at the same token, keeping an eye on the alternatives to see if there's anything I can do to replace that. Oh, another feature that's gone is local notebooks. So at times, like if I know that I'm going to go on a trip and I don't know if I'm going to have good internet connection there, so I select certain notes, I copy them into a local notebook so that when I go to my iPhone, it downloads it there and it keeps stored locally. So I can get to those notes wherever I am. So like when I go to trips, even more so like um, to other countries or what have you, making sure that I have all of my important documents stored on that one local notebook so that's easily accessible. Because it's like, well, I cannot get on the web, so how do I get to that information that I know I have? So that's gone as well. It's like, guys. So yeah.
Yeah.
Something. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, good luck with the Evernote transition. Can you dump it all to like? I assume you can get like all your notes dumped out, right, into XML or something.
Yes, yeah, they do have a way to export all the notes. Yes.
So whatever you do, you could always come up with like some sort of migration process.
Yeah, that's something they've always made from day one. I guess they made sure that for the users, like, okay, you have all your data. I mean, like, anytime I have it installed on the desktop version on the Windows or the Mac, it downloads all of that data, and it does have an option to export to. I haven't really looked into what formats they do, but yeah, actually, I think for Notion there is like an importer that they actually provide. You can just point to Evernote notebooks and it will suck in those notes. That's actually, yeah, thanks for reminding me that. That's something I'm thinking of doing. Just grabbing one notebook that I have in Evernote, import it into Notion, see how that's going to translate into their tagging system and the navigation part of it. But then they do not have like an offline version of it, right? It's all web-based. That kind of kills me. Because sometimes I do work on my notes and I'm offline, and then I'm lost in the woods.
Do they not have apps, installable apps?
I don't think so. I haven't seen anything, or at least not something that would work offline. I think that was what I heard from some of these videos that I've watched.
Okay. Well, you should also check if it's a PWA, maybe. Because if it's a PWA, it will work online even though it's a web app. But
yeah,
depending on how PWA it is.
Right. Yeah, good point. I'll definitely keep checking. Yeah, I don't expect like to be jumping ship anytime soon, like within a month or so, because it's a large system that I use. So, it will take me time to experiment and adapt to other things, but that's that. All right, cool. Yes, we're at the top of the hour.
I got to jump.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, welcome, Jeremy. I hope you got something out of this, and I hope to see you.
Yes, definitely.
Next time.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. You all have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.